Late night bites with friends? Already hard to beat. That first too hot bite of fries you couldn't wait for, followed by ice cold Pepsi. Now that hits different. Suddenly, the energy kicks back in, the night goes longer, and the laughs don't stop. Because Pepsi brings out more flavor, more fun, and more of the moment. Food deserves Pepsi. Grab a Pepsi Zero Sugar today.
I'm not giving up.
I am selling the building.
The final season of FX's The Bear.
The restaurant is flooded.
Everything's either going to be okay.
No, stop!
Or not.
We are outgunned and we are outmanned, but we have each other.
FX's The Bear, the final season. All episodes now streaming on Disney+.
Cabbage Patch dolls actually have a very dark, twisted, and weird history. So everybody knows the cute little Cabbage Patch dolls that was big in the 80s and 90s. What a lot of people don't know is the origins of those dolls and where the ideas come from. So there's actually a few different theories and then a couple things that are in concrete. The first weird extreme theory about Cabbage Patch dolls is it's their way of disclosing right in our face that there was a massive cloning or repopulation event that had to happen because our population was almost wiped out a couple hundred years ago in the 1800s. This goes hand in hand with the Tartaria theory, saying that we believe our civilization has been reset greatly very recently, and it's probably happened multiple times. The Tartaria theory, we did a whole hour-long video on that if you want to go down it, but it's essentially where our civilization went through a massive extinction-like event, whether it was from war or something, in the atmosphere that was natural, like a meteorite, or a massive disease that wiped us out. There's a lot of ideas about how Tartaria happened. But where this comes from actually is rooted in a lot of really good points. So the first thing is in the 1800s, there are these posters everywhere. And we have a lot of them still today and are pretty well preserved. They were really big in Europe, but they could be found all over the world. And it shows pictures of like baby farms. And when I say baby farms, I mean, it literally is like these farms and like people are growing babies like out of the ground. Now, this could be a metaphor. This could be some very popular story that took the world by storm, like some kind of like little children's story, kind of like the Three Little Pigs. But these baby farms always come out of cabbages, no matter where they are in the world. Like some of these places didn't have cabbage, and they still depicted these cabbage-like plants growing babies. Once again, that could have been the story carrying over, or it could have been some kind of genetic farming, genetic testing, cloning thing that we don't know about. And this is weird, I know. But we've been doing genetic tests and altering for a long time, like a really long time. So even as recent as World War II, there was a Nazi scientist that was the head of the genetic department. They were trying to make the Nazi master race. And that guy, his name was Joseph, and he escaped to South America, to this little village, Candido Gondoy. And this village, to this day, has an extremely high rate of twins being born, more than anywhere else in the world. So this little village in South America has like a 1 in 3 to 1 in 4 chance of having twins. And he was the village doctor there after he fled there after World War II. A lot of people said that because he was doing genetic testing in the military, that he continued these genetic tests while he was there. What would be the point of making twins more popular? It's actually very sick and twisted, and it was the fact that it was going to be to have one superior, child, mainly a boy, in these rich families that want a boy heir. And then you would have a lesser superior child. And that child would be essentially a slave to the first one that would do everything that he wanted to be done or she wanted to be done. And then if he ever got like a heart or lung or, some kind of needed a blood transfusion, whatever, you would always have a perfect genetic match, which would be his twin or her twin. That's the reason why those tests were done. It's sick, it's twisted, I know, but that's real. Like that's not even the conspiracy part. That's a real thing. Going back to these baby farms, the baby farms could be just a metaphor in these posters for saying like, hey, this is a place where we farm babies. Like we have to get our population numbers back up. And these postcards, the pictures can, is up for debate, right? Those could be metaphors. Those could be, just art. That could be whatever. But these postcards were talking about having to repopulate and reminding people to populate the earth back. Like they were called repopulation postcards was their official names. Now, they translate to a lot of different words and ways, depending on what language you're reading, but it's essentially saying to go pick up your babies or to go get these babies. And that goes hand in hand with another weird phenomenon that was going on in the 1800s, and it was the massive rise of orphans. The 1800s saw so many orphans worldwide. Now, science and history tries to explain this away as there was massive diseases. That was like the Industrial Revolution, and a lot of parents were getting killed on the job and in the workforce because things were very dangerous, and there wasn't such things as OSHA back then. And people were traveling more than ever to go work in new places, and sometimes they'd get separated from their families. And without modern technology or documentation systems like the Social Security number, there was no way to find these kids their families if they got separated. Whatever you want to believe, and also the great poverty level, and some families were purposely abandoning their children, which is actually how my great grandpa came into our family. We actually do not know what that guy's last name was. He was found tied to a tree when he was only a couple years old. Super weird, I know. He was also tied there with other children. We don't know their relation to him, but they were already dead, and he was still alive barely. And so this thing, we know this stuff was happening. So people were purposely abandoning their kids because they could not afford to feed them, and the poverty level was just crazy out of control. So there was something called orphan trains. I'm not making this up. Orphan trains. They ran from the 1850s to the early 1920s. So around 70 years, these orphan trains ran. And during their time, they moved more than 250,000 orphans around the country. And they mainly moved them from big cities to very rural, small areas.
The perfect lunch combo. That first bite of your favorite sub, followed by ice-cold Pepsi. Add a couple of friends, and now that's next level. Suddenly, the laughs get louder, the stories keep flowing, and the food tastes better. Because Pepsi brings out more flavor, more fun, and more of the moment. Food deserves Pepsi. Grab a Pepsi Zero Sugar today.
I'm not giving up.
I am selling the building.
The final season of FX's The Bear.
The restaurant is flooded.
Everything's either going to be okay.
No, stop.
Or not.
We are outgunned and we are outmanned, but we have each other.
FX's The Bear, the final season. All episodes now streaming on Disney+.
Orphan trains are weird. This is where it gets really weird, because there was this other guy. His name was Charles Brace, and he started this program with the orphan train program. And this program would take kids that were orphans from the big cities and take them to good value, good moral, Christian farm families. And nothing could go wrong with that, right? A bunch of Christian weirdos. And I'm not saying that Christians are weirdos. I grew up Church of Christ. But I'm just saying, you're signing up to get free kids. Not only free kids, the state is actually going to pay you to take care of them. And what they found is some reports that the kids grew up in a great life, just like we know they would. But a huge majority of these families was using these kids as slave labor. So they were getting these kids off these trains that no one was ever going to check up on again, by the way. You know, the CPS and all that stuff, DHS, all that, none of that came about yet. They'd be giving these kids essentially for free, and then the state was going to pay them to house them and take care of them. They would give them the bare bones, accommodations, a lot of times making them live out in the barns with the animals, feeding them just whatever would get them to survive, and then making them work extremely crazy hours. I also hate to say this, my family did the same thing. Not saying my family is bad, but my great-great-grandma, she's still alive. She's actually 103 years old. Her name's Oline. It's crazy. My great-great-grandmother's still alive, which makes it my daughter's great-great-great-grandmother technically is still alive. It's wild, I know. They did this. They had these orphan kids that would work on their farms until they were 18. Now, those orphan kids, I grew up thinking they were actually members of my family because that's how they were treated. So I'm not saying every family was bad, obviously, like I was saying earlier. But that was the reason why they got them, is because they needed help on these massive farms. And that's why they had kids of their own as well. They took care of these kids, and they did take really good care of them, but they were going to work while they were on this farm. And, I have, Candy and Michelle and several people that, growing up, I did not know that they were originally from these programs a long time ago. And I just thought of them as like Aunt Candy and Aunt Michelle. And now growing up, I've been told hey, they were here from those programs, and they just loved the family so much they just kind of stuck around, and we all were never told anything different. So we know these programs were around, and that's where the term that we know of, Cabbage Patch Kids, comes from, because that's the nickname these kids got, was Cabbage Patch Kids, because they were going to come off these trains, these families were going to get them, get out in the field, start, picking cabbage or whatever the other big farms were. Cabbage was actually a very, very popular crop back then, way more than it is now, because it was cheap and easy to grow, and it could feed a lot of people for very, very, very cheap. And it's also an easier crop to grow as far as crops go. Some crops can be very difficult. And there's a wide area of which you can grow cabbage in this country. So Cabbage Patch Kids, that's where the name we know for sure is coined from, is that exact anomaly. There's some more weird stuff that goes into it, though, that's like kind of gets into the darker things. This gets into the rise of the great American mental asylum programs. All over the country in the 1800s were constructed these giant, monumental insane asylums. And there's a lot of conspiracies on why they even existed. Here's what we do know. The two biggest buildings in the United States for like the first 150 years the United States was a country were mental asylums. The biggest building in the entire country up until like 1910 or something, until the Empire State Building was built, was this giant mental institution in Ohio, in the middle of freaking nowhere. And it's still there today. I guess that was false. It was destroyed in 1996. So I was alive when it was still built, and I guess I remember seeing photos of it, but it's not there no more. Anyhow, until 1996, that building stood there. Now, these mental institutions were popping up everywhere, and they were huge. Now, a lot of people said, yeah, we had to have them because, we knew nothing about mental health. People at home did not have the resources to take care of mentally handicapped members of their family. But here's where it gets strange. A lot of people say that it actually does have ties to Tartary, like we talked about earlier. And these mental institutions were the places where people were going to go that did not want to conform to the new government of the world. They were believers in the old ways. Whatever those old ways were, we'll probably never know. They've probably been lost to time. Because weirdly enough, almost all these people going to these mental institutions were about the same age. Like, where were they at before? They talked about it was too hard for families to take care of them. Well, what were they doing? A lot of these, the average intake of a mental institute patient was between the ages of 35 and 45. So somebody was taking good enough care of them for their whole life, essentially, until this point. I understand their parents might have been getting older and passing away, but these mental institutions were also filled with something else, and it was boatloads of children, and nothing was wrong with these children. Where did these children come from? They were the leftover orphanages that they could not find homes for to go on these farms. They were the orphanages the orphans that were overcrowding these orphanages, and there was nowhere left for them to go, so they would cram them into these mental institutions. And because these kids would be there, a lot of times they would go quite literally insane, because we now know that a lot of these mental institutions absolutely had no idea what they were doing. And they were not really institutions, but like dungeons where awful tests were being conducted on people. There was so much things that were medicine that we now know was just pure evil torture. I can't imagine how anybody thought that was the right idea in the first place. And these kids, when they'd have behavior issues, they would get labeled with, oh, well, they're already here. There must be something wrong with them. Let's go ahead and put them in these programs. And a lot of them would stay there for the rest of their lives. So these kids would beg to get out of these places and be a Cabbage Patch Kids. All these Cabbage Patch Kids, though, weren't always real orphans. We now know that there was tons of reports of kids that just, maybe they got in trouble because they stole something at the market and the police took them in. Well, back then there was no Social Security document systems, and their families didn't want to be responsible for paying for whatever they stole, or kind of like we talked about earlier, they couldn't afford to feed them anyhow, and they were kind of on the fence, so their families wouldn't go looking for them. There was no way for the police to find them, so they would just go essentially unclaimed, and the police would say, hey, just turn them over to the state, and the state's going to do what they will. And they would ask these kids, what do hey, you can go to this orphanage, you can go to the insane asylum, or you can go to these farms. They would almost always pick these farms. And so Cabbage Patch Kids were going there by the buttloads. And as you can imagine, we described the conditions of these farms earlier, then they would run away. And that's why you'd have slews of orphans all over the place. These slews of orphans have what inspired, Huckleberry Finn and Little Orphan Annie and Oliver Twist. Like, it's all these tales of these kids going on these grand adventures. That's what led to a lot of the great American stories that we had in the 1900s, where a kid is on their own and they're going to take over the world and they're going to be powerful. And that's what inspired a lot of Disney. If you guys haven't ever realized that there's a certain trope in Disney, it's that you're better off on your own without your parents. If you didn't know that, name any Disney movie. I'll do something for you. Lion King. His dad gets killed right away. He goes on his own, lives like an orphan, comes back, becomes king. Bambi. Dad's not in the picture. Surprise, surprise. Most of our dads aren't. And then Mama gets just absolutely blasted at the beginning. He runs around on an adventure being an orphan, essentially. Comes back, being king of the forest. All of these stories from Disney have the same exact idea. Get away from your parents or be without your parents and you'll be more successful. Because that was such a big goal back then. There were so many orphans back then that these stories were truly inspiring for these kids that grew up as orphans. And that's why Disney hit home with them so good. And that's why it had such a stranglehold on everybody going forwards, because they saw themselves in these films and in these stories. And we really don't realize how much that shaped our whole world and our culture. And we see them today as Cabbage Patch Kids without knowing all the dark, trauma, twisted, weird stuff. You guys, if you buy a Cabbage Patch Kid, you got to give it a good home, because you don't want to be like one of those old farm owners that made them work all night and day. I hope you guys enjoyed this weird, twisted story about the origins of Cabbage Patch Kids and some of the dark mysteries that could be behind them. Follow our podcast. It's called Matt from Nomads on YouTube, on, what do we got? Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and on TikTok, we're Nomads Animal Encounter, and on Facebook, we're also Nomads Animal Encounter. Would love to see you on the YouTube page. We just started that YouTube page, really ramping and going. We have millions of followers everywhere else, and then on YouTube, we have like 8,000. So I'm a lot more likely to see your comment over there, because there's really not much coming through over there. Would love to see you there, and yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this weird story.